If you were to Google the term DevOps, you would find it's attributed to Pat Dubois, a Belgium-based IT consultant. According to reports back in 2009, Dubois first came up with the name DevOps by taking the first three letters of development and operations, added the word days, and called it DevOps Days. Sometime later on, Dubois shortened it to DevOps, and that's how it came to be. Now, we are all aware that the goal of DevOps is to enable organizations to rapidly build and release very high-quality software. It is also recognized for fostering a culture of collaboration and efficiency between application developers and the IT operations managers. In this program, expert Bob Aiello explores DevOps culture and the benefits it brings to his area of expertise, software development. Now, let's begin our report. According to the recent State of DevOps report, a survey of some 25,000 IT, development, quality control, and management professionals, DevOps practices improve the software development delivery cycle at every stage. In addition, the survey results reveal that DevOps practices improve software quality, stability, and business outcomes. The 25,000 survey respondents experienced 200 times more frequent deployments and 2,555 times shorter lead times. Change failure rates were 3 times lower, and recovery from failures was 24 times faster. All in all, those are amazing statistics that speak very clearly of the DevOps advantage. But to be successful with DevOps takes much more than speed, tools, and a good skill set. It takes a team of people that are willing to modify their regular work routine and behavior patterns. They must be willing to come together at a whole new level that emphasizes collaboration, trust, and responsibility. According to the IT analyst firm Gartner, organizations that move to DevOps without recognizing the cultural change it requires are likely setting themselves up for failure. Today's guest expert, Bob Aiello, has over 25 years of experience in software development. He is well-versed in the importance of establishing a robust team culture to ensure successful DevOps initiatives. We asked Aiello to explain what a DevOps culture is all about, and perhaps more importantly, why it matters.
Well, a DevOps culture helps the organization communicate and collaborate effectively in an open way, where different opinions are respected, where folks are free to agree and disagree, admit openly their mistakes. It's a creative culture that really leads the organization to have effective communication between all the teams that are involved with helping the organization be successful. Understanding organizational culture really has to start with understanding what culture is about in the first place. And culture is really all about all the things that help the organization tick. It's almost as if you go into an organization and there's a set of unwritten rules. There's a set of things that people just understand. And it's almost hard to describe. Psychologist Carl Jung used to talk about a collective unconscious, just the sense that there's these rules that people understand by virtue of the fact they exist in that society, and it's almost hard to trace back to where they learned these things. So the culture drives all the interactions in the organization.
David Needle is a well-regarded author and a lecturer on international business in the Department of Management at King's College, London. He is an expert on organizational culture. He writes that organizational culture represents the collective values, beliefs, and principles of organizational members and is a product of such factors as history, product, market, technology, strategy, type of employees, management style, and national culture. Culture includes the organization's vision, values, norms, systems, symbols, language, assumptions, beliefs, and habits. Let's listen as Bob Aiello gives us his take on what culture means in an organizational context.
Well, in an organization, there's a set of rules. There's almost a contract, and often there are real contracts between the folks that are in that organization. There's a structure within the organization. There's different guidelines, and you have to operate within that framework. And I often like to look at where did the organization come from? An internet startup has a very different culture than, say, a defense contractor, or one of my favorites, a nuclear power plant. And you really have to start by understanding the culture of that organization, what makes them tick, before you can start to think about how do I make things better.
Trying to understand an organization's culture can be a difficult task at best. We asked Aiello if there were other similar challenges.
So culture is just part of the puzzle. I like to encourage folks to think of culture as just being one of the many different challenges. If I were to talk to you about the technology challenges that you have to tackle, or the competition from outside, or maybe regulatory pressures, even just the economy, you understand those as legitimate factors to consider. Well, culture is a legitimate factor that has to be considered as well. So you have to think about, how does your culture in your organization impact the way you work on a daily basis? Do you feel comfortable delivering bad news to your boss? Do you feel comfortable openly admitting if you made a mistake? If you're in a culture that really stifles people, makes them feel scared, drives fear, that's not going to help the team succeed. So your culture really has a direct impact on the success of everything that you do.
A famous quotation from scientist and physicist Albert Einstein states that any fool can know. The point is to understand. But when it comes to organizational culture, where do you start the journey? How do you begin to fully understand it?
Well, the first thing I like to do is to understand the history of the organization. Where did they come from? And I often get that by my first interactions. And, I'll come in and I'm greeted by somebody at the security desk. How do people act? Are they proactive? Are they wary? What kind of a rhythm do I feel in the organization? How are people interacting as they pass by me? So I try to understand both the way things are today, as well as I'll ask a few questions about how the organization came to being. One really interesting factor is if organizations are comprised of different units that got brought together through acquisition and mergers, then you may have a clash of cultures. Different sub-organizations, different organizations that came together may have cultures that actually impact each other. So you really have to understand the history of what's going on. Another thing you have to understand is the whole ecosystem. Are there a lot of competitors in that space? Is that space being directly impacted by regulatory changes? The whole ecosystem, the environment, all those different factors really give you a sense of what that culture is like.
In a recent Harvard Business Review article, author Denise Lee Yohn wrote an article entitled, "Your Company Culture Shouldn't Just Be Great, It Should Be Distinctive." According to Yohn, just as brand differentiation helps attract customers, culture differentiation helps attract the right employees. She goes on to write that not having a distinct culture is the equivalent to a marketing department saying, we need to have a strong brand, without articulating what that strength will rest on. We asked our guest expert, Bob Aiello, to give us an example of organizations that he has worked with that possess a distinctive organizational culture.
Well, one culture that I was deeply impacted by was the nuclear power plant industry. I gave some classes in DevOps and configuration management, and throughout all of those courses, as I interacted with the students, I was deeply moved by their absolute implicit understanding of quality. It seemed that every step of what they did, they understood that a simple mistake could literally lead to a nuclear incident. And so their whole culture was all about, how do I check? How do I double check? They really had embedded a culture of quality in all of their interactions. And that really moved me as I was teaching them and impacted me personally in a number of important ways. Hedge funds also have a distinct culture. They often have a very strong competitive edge. They're keenly aware that one wrong move and their fund can literally go out of business. This has happened. You may find that large banks and financial services firms have a sense that they're being watched by regulatory authorities, so they have a strong culture. Defense contractors and government agencies, it could be that half the people in that organization came out of the Navy or some other armed services, so they have a unique culture as well. I remember walking into one organization and they had assault weapons literally parked in front of the building. They had a very unique culture. So the first step is to really understand that group, what makes them tick, what helps them be effective, and also what are their challenges. And another example is really this whole startup nation, the whole sense of internet startup firms that start with a couple of guys in a dorm room, a few people with an idea, and then start growing. Their biggest challenge is often when they scale, and now they have to start to put in structure, whereas a smaller team was able to get by with just some informal ways of communicating with each other.
If there's a real need and a strong desire to improve organizational culture, what needs to be done exactly? Do you offer a perk of some kind? More vacation, perhaps? Or maybe put in a high-end coffee bar? Or how about buying lunch every day for the crew? Well, those are good thoughts, but as you can imagine, it is going to take more than that to give your organizational culture the boost. Bob Aiello offered this advice.
Well, the first thing you got to understand is where you are. You can't improve anything unless you're able to assess the culture that you're in. So I always ask people, what's going well, what could be improved? And I find that folks are normally quite forthcoming about what the problems are. And in many cases, they're also very good at understanding what needs to change and improve, but they don't have the voice to be able to really impact the whole organization. So, just as an example, I find that some organizations have a culture of fear. So part of what I may have to do is help that team work through layers of management to be able to improve the way that people interact and understand that somebody makes a mistake who's willing to come forward and talk about it is a good thing, particularly if you learn from that. And it's all about creating a plan for improving things. One of the most serious problems I've seen is organizations which have a culture in which they've learned to be helpless. The different people there feel so frightened that if they speak up, something bad could happen. They've learned to basically surrender and not be proactive at addressing problems. That's one of the biggest challenges that I find in many organizations today, and it really has to be addressed. So there also could be an overemphasis on positional power, where there's less focus on who knows the most and what your rank is in the organization. It's almost like being part of an army. And that can be very, very dysfunctional.
Small business, medium-sized business, corporations, and multinationals. Let's face it, there are many ways to classify a business. We wondered if the size of an organization comes into play at all when you're looking to improve organizational culture.
Well, the size of the organization greatly impacts the interactions of all the players in that company. A small organization often operates like a family, maybe a dysfunctional family, but a family nonetheless. Larger organizations tend to have silos, and sometimes I find that some of those groups almost act like they're in business for themselves and they're not really doing what's in the best interest of the whole organization. Very often, even members of the organization who've been there for years don't know about all the different silos and organizational structures that exist in a big organization. So the way that you approach fixing cultural issues can be quite different if you're dealing with a small organization, a mid-size, or a very large conglomerate. And also keep in mind, geographically, those organizations may be in different places, and you have to consider the culture of that environment. Now, I've spent some time teaching in India, for example, and the way that I approached improving the organizational culture of some of those India-based teams was very different than I might do with a team that's in New York City, and it has to be different. So you have to consider the location of where you are.
Like many development professionals, Bob Aiello has had his fair share of experiences working in environments with culture issues and other challenges. But he's also worked with and led teams that really shine when it comes to their organizational culture. We asked him to tell us from his perspective what a healthy DevOps culture really looks like.
So the number one thing in a healthy DevOps culture is this sense of open communication, good collaboration, a sense that even if the problem is not really my problem, I'm invested in solving it. So I'm going to take that walk with you to make sure that we're successful. How can I help you? So if the issue turns out to be owned by another team, I'm still going to make sure you get in touch with the right people, that we communicate. I'm going to follow up with you to make sure that things get resolved. So it's that sense that we're all in this together. And that open communication, the willingness to admit mistakes, the focus on collaboration is really, really important. Now, I got to always look at senior managers in this particular case because they have to lead by example. And a lot of times I can affect good process change from the bottom up. This is not one of those times. Culture really has to be driven from the top down. Your senior executives, your C-level executives, they have to really show their sense and commitment to effective communication and collaboration. So I'll give you one example. I remember a time in which a bank that I was working with had a major outage, and it was human error. And someone stepped up and said, I made the mistake. So everybody got together, we all got on the call, and we started figuring out how to fix the problem. And it was incredibly stressful, and we were sharing the anxiety, we were sharing the fear. We didn't want to see our colleague get terminated as just a part of it. And one of the senior executives stepped up during the call and said, look, I know mistakes were made, and I value the fact that people admitted those mistakes. And I want you to know I value the teamwork over the fact that we dropped the ball this week. And I trust you guys, and I see you working together to make things better. That senior executive took the opportunity to take that problem and turn it into a way of motivating his entire team. That is effective DevOps communication.
The importance of team culture in regard to DevOps cannot be emphasized enough. However, we all know there is no easy way to create a strong collaborative team culture. First, the development and operations staffs will need to hunker down and break through the barriers that have in the past kept them locked in opposing corners. Then, strong leadership, along with team members with the right skills for the job and a willingness to collaborate, must rise to the occasion. These are truly the key critical success factors for any DevOps initiative. Bob Aiello elaborates.
So you have a focus on high-performance teams. The teams work together. Instead of saying something's not my problem, it's, well, let's set up a call, get everybody on the line, and we'll solve this together. So it's really a focus on the right principles and practices. For example, aside from effective communication and collaboration, it's a sense of systems thinking where I look at the whole system. I'm not just saying my network routers are working fine. I'm saying, can my customers get to their data? From the customer point of view, is the system working right? In organizations that are challenged by this, you might have one technical resource and says, oh, my routers are fine, my disks are fine, my computers are fine, but the customer's not getting what they need. You have to have a good sense of systems thinking. You have to make sure that everybody is involved with seeing that you achieve your desired results. So you also want a common set of practices. You don't want different teams approaching this in different ways. And that often happens. Different organizational structures often have their own ways of solving problems, and that may not work so well in the larger sense of the organization, particularly around problem solving. So there has to be a sense of feedback and experimentation, and what I like to call a sustainable pace. Can we all work at this pace on an ongoing basis? Or is somebody doing 12-hour shifts and very stressed out, more likely to make mistakes? Are we doing this in a way that we could operate for the long term? So another thing to consider is really automation and tools. It's very important that you not be doing things manually. If you're doing things manually, you're making mistakes. It's as simple as that. So, what can you automate? How do you share your knowledge? How do you make sure that the team is managing itself really, because the folks closest to the problem know how to solve it. So if somebody's coming from the outside telling them what to do, they're not going to be as effective. So I always say to folks, I'm not necessarily going to change your organizational structure, but I'm going to eliminate the impact of silos. I'm going to get the team to work more effectively together and to consider solving the problem as in a complete, cross-functional, high-performance team.
Today, remotely based workers collaborating on projects has become commonplace. In fact, data from Global Workplace Analytics tells us that the work-at-home non-self-employed population has grown by 103% since 2005. In addition, some 3.7 million employees now work from home at least part of the time. We asked Bob Aiello for his advice on managing remote workers and maximizing their productivity at work.
Co-location is a very important issue. Face-to-face interactions are obviously better than interactions where folks are in different places. But that's not the reality today. Most organizations are global enterprises. You may get an opportunity to be face-to-face with some colleagues for a period of time, develop a relationship, but more often than not, folks are working from their home, they're working from different places, again, different time zones, and it's very important to be able to understand those dynamics. I've had times in which 3 or 4 folks were in the same location, could get into a conference room, and then I've observed that the people in the room have a different quality of interaction than with the folks on the phone. So at times what I've actually decided to do is to have everybody be on the phone so that it's the same quality of interaction. I will remember one senior manager, he put everybody on hold and started making jokes while they were talking on the phone just with the folks inside the conference room. So he created almost an us and them mentality based upon whether or not folks were in the room or were remote. So you have to understand how that face-to-face interaction is going to impact your team and try to create a level playing field to maximize effective communication and collaboration.
As a development professional, Bob Aiello has led countless software projects to successful completion. He is also a sought-after software process improvement specialist who has worked with teams to help them maximize their potential. Over his long career, Aiello has developed a set of processes and practices to benefit enterprises that have adopted and implemented a DevOps approach. He shares them with us now.
So the very first thing that I always do is I work with the team to be able to assess where they are today. So someone has to give me a dance card. Someone has to tell me who it is that we're going to be speaking with, identify all those key stakeholders. And the first thing that I tell people is you're going to have to enlarge that dance card. Because as soon as folks find out what you're doing, they're going to be at your door and they're going to want to participate. So the number of people that you talk to inevitably is going to increase. And it's very important to include all those voices. I also want to consider, how do I gather that information? If I have a big meeting with 10 people, will everybody be able to speak up? Or will 1 or 2 people dominate the conversation? So there may be times in which I want to organize this so I'm having one-on-one conversations or small groups. But my goal is to be able to make sure that everybody has a voice and everybody can express their views and understand that they've been heard. Almost without exception, I find teams have the right solutions on the part of somebody in that group. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is to be able to filter through the noise and help that team organize their thoughts and present their best ideas so that we can get a plan together to improve the way that things are being discussed. Often it's very simple things like, how can I make sure that everybody feels comfortable delivering a tough message without fear of anything bad happening to them? Senior managers really have to work with us to make sure that the team is comfortable expressing their thoughts and views and helping the organization achieve the right results. Openness matters. Do senior managers show that they're open? Are senior managers willing to even admit their own mistakes? And can they be that cheerleader that says, okay, I see you made a mistake. Thank you for telling us. Let's work together and let's make sure that we achieve the right results. Do they recognize folks for their achievements? And do they make sure that everybody understands that their voice and their input really does count? Do they focus on creating those high-performing, really self-organizing teams? Do they delegate authority? Do they let the team run their own operation and make the decisions? And do they give them the resources, not the least of which is enough money, to be able to accomplish their goals? So they really have to make sure they create that environment. A good example is, can anybody stop the line? Can anybody really pull that cord and say, hey, there's a problem here, there's a mistake, stop what we're doing long enough to go figure out what's going on? I know of one organization, a trading firm, where the employees identified certain anomalies with the system. They notified senior management, who told them not to really do anything further, and the system went down. The whole trading system went down. But the employees had warned senior management the problems were occurring. They could have failed over to their backup system and had no impact. In reality, they ended up being completely down that day because they didn't listen to the people that were delivering them a message about there being a problem. So I already mentioned co-location's important, sustainable pace. You really have to think about, how does the team really work as a whole in a practical way, in an open way, and most importantly, you want to make sure that the team is always able to continuously improve and be able to head in the right direction toward those high-performance teams with as open communication, good collaboration, and really that's the way you get a DevOps culture in place.
Well, that completes our report, Understanding DevOps Culture, featuring our guest expert, Bob Aiello. We'd like to thank Bob for sharing his insights and understanding of the DevOps world. I'm your host, Michael Quinlan, and thanks for watching.